Hi everyone. I'm Ali Benes and I'm the session chair for this final hour in the lead up to the closing plenary, which is in this room. The first half hour we have a presentation on the human-centered content strategy. Our panelists this afternoon are Ryan Dodge from the Royal Ontario Museum, Laurie Bird McDevitt from the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, and we have Dan Hollowak from CrowdRiff, and he will kick off.
Thanks, Ali. Dan, do you want to? Oh, that's not a good idea. Like that. All right. Okay. Let's jump through. So I love the amount of content so far at MCN around creating a more human-centered museum, and a lot of conversation sessions I've seen around using the visitor content that's being generated within your space. It's a really important topic, and you're going to hear from Laurie and Ryan on some really practical examples about how they've been very successful with this. But to start off, let's recap why now? Why is this so important? It's the volume, right? There's more content being created by every visitor in your museum than your institution could ever create on its own. It's about trust. The content that's being created by these visitors is certainly more highly trusted than the way most consumers have learned to interpret brands today. And it's more engaging, of course, more human. When you think about even an art museum, think about like that angle of curiosity. Like that photo of someone leaning into something versus just a photo of the object itself is just so much more engaging to pull you in. And we know that 65% of people find that they trust this kind of authentic content created by friends or word of mouth than what's created by a brand. And the folks we've seen be most successful with this kind of an approach are those that are developing their own type of visual influence. This is a bit of a new phrase, and what I mean by that is that they're building memorable experiences through visual stories. And so in addition to the things you're going to hear from Ryan and Laurie, I wanted to share 4 really quick best practices based on what we've seen. First, you are your brand's curator. Again, this has been a great topic I've seen throughout a couple of sessions. You don't need to share everything, right? You can curate what's being shared so it's the best blend of what's branded and aspirational with what is more organic and really authentic about how people are experiencing your space right now. So you want to find that intersection between what is your mission and your story of your museum, and how does that link up with how you're curating how people are experiencing it? What kind of experience do you want to convey overall? And what kind of feeling do you want to leave somebody with? Sometimes UGC is the story in itself, and it's easy to overlook if you're not looking for it. So Fred Shepard became enchanted by Chris Hadfield, famous Canadian astronaut, and he took this cutout all over the country on a road trip and posted all this incredible content. This wasn't happening inside, a space or aviation museum, but it's an amazing story they could stitch together that's really engaging for folks. And if you're not looking, if you're not able to discover this kind of content and put it together, you can miss a whole story that's really valuable. Consider the micro-influencers. A lot of stuff you see in the news and in the press is like, go after people with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. The museums we see being really effective are engaging folks that have 100 or 1,000 followers, folks that have actual meaningful engagement and influence in their own circles of the community. And if you can do that, at scale, and you'll hear about some of this, is you can actually reach much greater heights by engaging more people instead of chasing after some of the big ones who ultimately end up feeling less authentic at times too. And you have to take it beyond social media. Like I think UGC has been linked maybe too closely to social networks. Like, it's fundamentally just a new way of visitors creating their own content. And you should consider how you use it the same way you'd use any amazing photo or video. Think about how you'd use this content in an advertisement, in some dynamic ads or things like that. Think about how you'd use it in your email. Think about how you'd use it on your website. Think about how you'd use it in print or something of that nature, right? We need to break away from just thinking of UGC as something strictly based on and the cycle of just social media. So it's my pleasure next to introduce you to Lori, who's going to take us through her success with the Children's Museum of Indianapolis.
Okay. All right. Yep. Awesome. So I really love my role as social media manager at the Children's Museum because it allows me to directly interact with the museum's community. Being the world's largest children's museum, you can imagine that I get to see a lot of cute content every single day. And it just makes sense that we'd want to share these photos on our social web and in our other marketing collateral too, so not even just digital. Over the past year, we've purposefully shifted strategies to prioritize user photos on social and also on our website. So this is an example of one of our exhibit landing pages, our Dinosphere gallery. And so this is prioritizing putting user photos at the top of the page, and our kind of glory shot marketing photos are now actually the footer. And the mission of the Children's Museum is focused around family learning. So the goal is to feature these real family learning experiences that are authentic and really happening in the moment, rather than these posed marketing shots. So we aim to showcase lots of diversity in these photos. You'll find grandparents with grandkids, teenagers and young adults, and any number of other types of visitors that you'll come upon. So our families naturally share photos during and after their visits, especially at many of our photo ops. So, from the depths of the oceans that are underwater shipwreck to our interactive representation of the International Space Station that we just opened. So the trick is really just finding all of these moments, all these photos. And we do use a general museum hashtag at TCM. We encourage the use of this in our map, on digital signage around the museum, on our social channels, even on giant billboards, truly giant billboards. I mean, at TCM is like this big in some cases, but that doesn't mean that people are going to use that hashtag, as we all know so well, right? So CrowdDrift really helps us be able to aggregate on the back end a whole lot of other different search terms or tracking terms. So this includes geolocation, other search terms or keywords, and divergent hashtags they might come up with. So we don't usually use a Dinosphere hashtag, but if they choose to, we'll find you. They also like to, of course, tag us as the Indianapolis Children's Museum, which is not our name, but everyone wants it to be. So we also encourage photo sharing and use of the museum's hashtag through in-exhibit photo streaming and contesting. In the last session, we just talked about how contesting isn't cool anymore. But we do it a little bit at the Children's Museum. Our audience, I think, is primed for it. So this is an example in our Doc McStuffins exhibit right now. Tons of super cute photo opportunities, of course, happening in there. And we just use the museum's hashtag. Oops, sorry, got excited. We just use the main museum hashtag, actually, because there's no technical need on the back end to have specific exhibit hashtags. So CrowdDrift really helps with that. We're able to sort out our photos in different tags. And so we don't have to be retraining our audiences all of the time to now do a Doc McStuffins hashtag and now do a Dinosphere hashtag. So we really try to keep everything in that main hub. So user-generated photos, are really this constant source of authentic and rich visual content that tell the true story of the museum. And we use a rights approval tool in CrowdDrift to request the usage of user photos for other marketing purposes. And what this is just an automated way that on the back end we can tag photos that we think are just really brilliant and amazing, and it automatically sends a request that we've pre-written to that user on Instagram or Twitter, And then with a hashtag we've established, they can say hashtag yes TCM, and it provides that rights approval on the back end. So we don't have to go back and find this Instagram photo again in a week when I remember about it. And it really helpfully kind of pulls together everything that's then rights approved, and I download those all out of CrowdDrift. So this is one example of just a really beautiful photo that we now have rights approval for even not just social use, but also in our member magazine, or even if we wanted to on a billboard. However, social photos don't tend to blow up like that, but you get the idea. Another thing that we use is an automated conversations feature. So I think it was Amy, I think in the last session, was talking about how hard it is to respond to so many different people when you have hundreds and hundreds of photos and these great moments coming in. Well, CrowdDrift has really helped us to automate conversations. So what this does, I'm going to try to concisely explain this. Dan might jump in here in a second. So we're able to create conversations on the back end that are around each exhibit that are unique replies, about 5 or 6 unique replies for each exhibit, but it just auto-generates that reply out in Instagram or Twitter. So I will tag every Dinosphere photo, and then it will just automatically send out a different kind of question that then helps us engage with the audience. So for example, we have a carousel that's on our 4th floor. Emily, you'll appreciate this. We have some carousel selfie comments that we get. We get tons of carousel selfies. Thank you for that. So we like to do a lot of thank you for sharing your carousel selfie. I now don't have to type that into Instagram 17 times in a row. I just click it on the back end in CrowdDrift, and they get a nice carousel emoji, and thanks for your carousel selfie comment. In our immersive Take Me There China exhibit, we might say thanks for visiting China with us today. What was your favorite part? With Bumblebee the Transformer, who's shown here, we like to say things like, you know, Bumblebee loves to pose for photos. Thanks for posing with him today. And even though it is automated and kind of robotic, people aren't necessarily picking up on that. We are engaging with our audience, and they're answering us back. So here they said, you know, Children's Museum, we had a wonderful time. Fun, educational, and clean. Thanks for the free parking as well. It's a good example, right? There are potential cons to this sort of automation, which we're doing our best to combat. So if things go awry, it can make us look automated and less authentic. So you do have to be careful that you're actually commenting on the right exhibit. And because of the time it takes to sort and send responses, we do them in batches every couple of days. So actually, some of these photos that we might have replied right away in between a meeting actually might wait a couple of days. But that is with the caveat that our customer service photos or comments or anything like that are completely separate from anything we do in CrowdDrift. So we're still doing our 4-hour window of customer service replies no matter what. These are really all just the photos that I might not have never gotten to because we have so many. So CrowdDrift really helps us fulfill this gap of all those great photos that weren't getting comments on and might have just gotten a like, again, in between a meeting. So overall, we've made great strides over the past year in ramping up our user photo game. We're engaging more frequently and consistently, and we're systematically gathering great photos of these authentic family moments that we're now incorporating into our marketing. And when I see all of the adorable photos coming in each day, I really feel better knowing that we're making the most of these great resources and putting our real-life visitors at the forefront of our museum's brand. Okay. Time for the ROM.
So, can you guys hear me? Is this thing on? So, Dan and I have actually known each other for a few years. This tweet is from 2012, I believe, and I've kept it because this is from our event, Friday Night Live, that we run 18 times a year on Friday evenings. And in 2012, we started aggregating user-generated content and displaying it live at the event. I quickly realized that we needed to give our community that comes to this event ownership over the event. We live in a world where we can't keep telling people that we're cool and fun and places to visit. We need them to do it for us. And by displaying and aggregating and engaging with user-generated content, you're delivering on that, and you're placing your community before the institution, and that's just the world we live in. Just to give you an idea, we welcome around 65,000 visitors to this event per year. It's all marketed through social media. This is how I know social can drive physical visitation. The majority are female, aged between 19 and 34, and they come in groups of 6 or more. So they're sharing a lot of photos. Last summer, we had a Pompeii exhibit, and we included a lot of photography encouraged signage with the hashtag and just a really nice logo before you even got into the exhibit and throughout the exhibition. And we actually integrated social with the hands-on activities that we built through this exhibition. The big thing about this is the first special exhibition that we've had at the ROM that allowed photography. And I successfully argued to have that little clause omitted from loan agreements going forward, using Friday Night Live as our model. User-generated content is so important for selling the experience of visiting your museum. And you're promoting not only the ROM, but also the lending institution. Just an example of, it's hard to see above the guys' heads, but all it is photography encouraged in the hashtag. There's no like follow us or any of that kind of stuff. We really want people to be creative with their photos. By connecting the on-site and the digital, the on-site experience with digital engagement, we allow visitors to do that selling for us. There were 5,500 photos shared through the run of that exhibit, and that's not a ton, but it's more than if you didn't encourage, and it's 55 pieces of free advertising that I would argue is way more value than anything that you could pay for. Word of mouth is just massive these days. And we also put it on our website. This is a shot of we have a Chihuly gallery exhibition on right now, so you can go and check that out. The Chihuly exhibit opened in June, and we've already gathered over 12,000 photographs from visitors in this exhibition. There's only 11 pieces in this show. People can see right on our homepage what they're gonna see, what they're gonna experience in the exhibition. It works, people. It really, really works. I don't know if I gathered these numbers right, Dan. Maybe you have better ones at the end. But in 2015, we collected just under 42,000 photos from visitors. Like Lori, we track a number of hashtags, geotagged, and everything. And up until the end of August this year, from January 1st, we've collected over 50,000 photos, and I think we're already up over we're at 130,000. All told. So here's a really cool AR experience that we have going on right now. I'm going to speed through because we're almost done. But we're encouraging people to use this kiosk to take a photo with our T-Rex, which displays the T-Rex in AR. And we get lots of really cute kids doing this, and families, and they're being really creative. And we actually display that just next to it in gallery. So we moderate these photos. They populate up on the screen. And like Lori, we do the audio engagements, but we send people back a T-Rex fact. So we do the thanks for sharing, and then we send them, we actually try to teach them something about the T-Rex. And when we did Pompeii, we did the audio engagements as well, and I had a curator translate my auto engagements into Latin, so people were getting an English and a Latin response back from us, which I thought was pretty great. There's a few things that are wrong with this experience as a whole that I don't have time to get into, but I think when this little monitor here is on the way to the T-Rex, so people see this before they see the T-Rex, and then they're looking for the experience. We don't give people anything to do this, but people are challenged by other people's creativity, and that seems to be enough to get people to do it. So just in general, some results we've seen so far. Do you want to talk about that, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So across about 100 or so different customers right now, we're seeing great results across the board. So 3 to 4 times increase in time on the website. And it's just and when you think about that, you're actually multiplying the amount of content on your site massively, from maybe what's 3 or 4 photos to 20 photos. So there's so much more to relate to when they look at those photos. There's a 20% month-over-month increase in social followers typically because of you can just engage more people, as you heard. 65% of the photo rights you request get approved within 24 hours, which was mind-blowing to us. I attribute it to two things. People actually like museums. Like you're not like an evil brand or anything. So use what you've got going for you. Like you're a part of the community. You're sort of a beloved part of the community. And it's not their livelihood to make money off photos. So they're really willing to help you and agree to that. As Lori mentioned, being able to curate and show diversity in the folks that are coming to your museum. And the Children's Museum has 23,000 photos and videos in their system, and as Ryan mentioned, 130,000 for him at the ROM. So it's just an incredible indication of how visitors can be the absolute best ambassadors for your museum. And now we'll open it up to some questions for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You can start working on connecting if you.
There's a mobile mic.
So I'm not familiar with, I've been meaning to talk to you about the product, but I'm not completely familiar with it. So when Lori has the 20,000 images, are you actually downloading those and storing them locally? And how are you managing those internally if you are?
So I actually just download the rights approved photos, so that might be like 100 at a time. I actually have an intern do it, which is fantastic. Otherwise, we're tagging them on the back end so that we can keep track of them for use on the website. And then it's pulling in, we kind of call them our elite tags for each exhibit of what are our elite photos that are on the web versus what's our giant tag of all of our photos for that exhibit. So we're like getting our chunks of them and then sorting it all on the back end for those ones that are up on the web.
And we've created a search engine so that out of the 130,000 images, you can type in, best friend T-Rex and get people taking selfies with their best friends with the T-Rex in the background. So we create this massive on-brand collection that's kind of like your own photos. It feels like it, and we store it in the cloud. And then when you do a search in CrowdRiff, you don't have to think about hashtags and stuff. You just search for what you're looking for.
Any other questions? Emily, can you use the mic?
No. Do you have any pictures of the interface?
We just switched the text. So Emily asked if you have any pictures of the interface. This is being recorded. That's why I'm using the mic.
Yeah, of course. We'll have Lucas and Amrita give a wave up here too, and we'll be at the back right afterwards. We'll be happy to show you what the interface looks like. Yeah.
It's very user-friendly.
Really simple. Anyone else? Anything at all? Russell?
Can you talk us through just really briefly how you won that battle with the no photography clause in temporary exhibitions? Maybe not briefly.
Maybe over a cocktail in a bit. But I use Friday Night Live as the example. So that event started in 2012. There was absolutely no marketing budget for that event. It was all done through social. And so it was really like we needed to communicate that conversation was happening. And when it first started, we didn't display like a Twitter wall, like text-based Twitter wall at all. But when CrowdRiff, when we started doing the photo-based, we put it big, like on the biggest wall in the museum. We put it on screens, and Anne and I did a talk about this at MCN 2013. And it's really visible evidence that there is that digital conversation and that it spreads widely, and that people are paying attention. So I just showed examples of that, and people were like, "Oh, okay, I get it." So it helped that the special exhibition before that was very well attended, and photography was not allowed. So they wanted to try photography allowed, and the people from Pompeii were really happy to go that route. So now it's just omitted from the loan agreements, and no one really says anything about it anymore. So Yet. Anyone else? Anyone else? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sure. Thanks.
Hi, can you do it from over there?
Just for the intros part, I thought I would, but I'll get up.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, I'll kick off our next session. We have Dwayne Degler and Leslie Humphreys, and they're from a usability or usable design consultancy called Design for Context. And for the next half an hour, they will be talking about user experience design considerations for multi-museum online collaborations.
All right, thank you very much. Good to be here. Thank you for hanging in, enjoying the last session before the plenary. All right. All right, I'm gonna have to like crouch next to it apparently. Okay. Or yeah, we could do that. That works. All right, let's do this. So I'm Dwayne Degler, information architect, designer, and one of the owners of Design for Context.
I'm Leslie Humphreys. I do all of those things too, except for the owning part. I was in museums for 10 years and then changed careers and doing user experience now. But the great thing is that I've been able to combine both those passions in this job.
Great. So we have a lot to talk about today, but we want to start with the question of what are we really thinking about with multi-institution collaboration? And with that, really, we're hearing a lot from a lot of different people that we talk to that it's actually really desired by the institutions. You want to be interacting with others, sharing content, building additional value, and moving things forward. And also one of the reasons for that is it's also about the desire of the funders to make that happen. So I don't know how many of you saw the announcement, I'm sure all of you, this summer that NEH and IMLS are doing some joint grant. They've restructured their granting programs. And what was interesting is it wasn't just museums, but innovative collaborations between museums, library professionals, and other humanities professionals is a fairly important gauntlet to have thrown down, saying that this is an important thing to consider in all of your sort of planning and projects going forward. The IMLS, one of the things that triggered that was their National Digital Platform Report. All these links are in here. There's a bit.ly link that I showed at the beginning, which is MCN2016 DFC, if you want to get to the slides. But the key things here was this idea of uniting memory institutions and pursuing a shared strategy. And so that's really where we've been very active with a couple institutions now working on different projects, and we want to share some thoughts and ideas relating to that. So there's a few motivations. There's a lot of different motivations that institutions have for doing multi-institution collaboration. And when we say multi-institution, the other thing is we can also think about these as multi-department, because there are times when we work in big institutions and also deal with multi-department. So a lot of these things will carry forward. Some of the motivations that we're seeing regularly at the moment are to broaden exploration. They want to extend scholarly content and research, be able to draw in in different kinds of material, integrate museum assets with archives, libraries. They want to be able to extend topically or thematically, either by artist or by themes across multiple institutions, and make those exploratory, particularly for education purposes. And we also have sharing and reuse, the idea of being able to put things out there. Open access is now pretty well considered the norm, even if the implementation challenges of how to do that are coming up. And so these are the kinds of things we're seeing. We'll talk about a few projects that we've done as we go along that touch into these different areas. There's also the last one, which is avoiding one-offs. And so part of the goal of multi-institution collaboration is to get different perspectives and different requirements, so when you then can take that out and use that in other places. So some of the approaches we're going to talk about very briefly as we go through. We want to focus on showing you some examples, but we will be talking through how we establish goals, understanding the collaborative content itself, how we design for that, and then thinking about the considerations around sustainability. And there will be this matrix that will fill in a bit as we go, and then it'll all be filled in when we hit the end, where we take those different motivations and we take those different approaches, and you'll begin to see some of the activities and things that you can do yourselves as you do this. Whichever.
We'll see if this works. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about establishing goals first. And facilitating consensus and commitment is really critical, as I'm sure many of you know. I was just in the great presentation from the Philadelphia Museum of Art around this. I mean, I think a lot of times what's common with facilitating collaboration across departments in museums is also true of facilitating collaboration across institutional partners. So it's important if you can get everyone together face-to-face in the same room talking at least a few times over the course of a large project. We've been fortunate enough to have a few great gatherings working on the American Art Collaborative project, and this is a photo of a facilitation, a 2-day facilitation we did at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So it's important with this point about facilitating consensus and commitment that you do this at several levels and with several different stakeholder groups. So when we do the facilitations among the partners, we try very carefully to listen for key messages and key phrases that come out that are about the excitement and the possibilities that get the partners motivated to do these projects. We take a lot of notes, we listen carefully, and then we reflect that inspiration back to the group. That really gets everyone pointed in the same direction and gets them excited. The data collaborator commitment. So in addition to sort of being concerned about the overarching multi-partner level, we've also got the boots on the ground, the people who are actually going to be working with the data and the content. And we had one participant tell us, it's one thing to have the tech people in the room, but it's another thing to have all your stakeholders, curators, registrars, educators, archivists, all contributing. Because these are the folks who are going to really do the heavy work and the heavy lifting with making sure that the data is there and available. We want them to get excited and see the value too in the project and be able to take the message back home to their institutions and say, hey, this project is really great and it deserves our resources and our time. And then finally, of course, you need the formal executive commitment. There needs to be a charter, a memorandum of understanding, and you need to be doing that constant communication with leadership. The same communication that you're doing amongst yourselves, you need to be reporting up and also giving the opportunity to have feedback loops so you can get input and then document that as well. Discovering user needs is another really, really important way, not only of facilitating consensus and commitment, but of also delivering a good product, because you really want to know what people want. So if you get all the partners involved in this, it can pay off tremendously. Everyone's hearing the same messages, everyone's working toward the same goals, and they have the opportunity to tell you what their visitors, what their users, what their humans really need. Also, when you don't have the opportunity to speak with actual users, the staff that you're working with are, of course, tremendous sources of information, and they can be proxies for you. So just to give an example, in the American Art Collaborative Project, we developed a questionnaire with our partner institutions. We drafted it, we went through a couple of rounds of feedback, and then they were able to take that sort of lightweight questionnaire back to their users and their constituents and gather the information, whether by doing one-on-one interviews with the questionnaires or simply circulating them out to people to get the feedback. And then we took that survey and turned it into scenarios that were then available for everyone to have and reflect on and communicate communicate the goals of the project. And finally, eliciting limitations early is a really important step. A lot of times, these large collaborative grant-funded projects are happening outside the day-to-day activities of the museum. So how are we going to make sure that everything gets done with the workload that everyone has every day, all year long? And there can be a lot of politics, there can be a lot of logistics and a lot of politics around what is quote-unquote complete data. What is good enough? What are we going to be comfortable providing to this project that we feel like is going to reflect on the institution and reflect well on its mission? And then finally, rights and licenses. You probably can't start talking about this early enough, as we've all been hearing over the past few days. So again, as Dwayne was describing, we have these 3 motivations across the top for these type of projects, and when you're establishing goals, 3 points to keep in mind, and we'll just continue to fill in this matrix.
All right, so obviously the meat of these projects is in the content, and there's a lot. I mean, from your own institutions working with content, harmonizing across multiple institutions even gets more interesting. And so we've devoted a lot of time with this in a number of different projects. So this is an example of how the American Art Collaborative helped different groups play well together. Huge shout out to Kate Blanche at the Walters and Emmanuel Delmas-Glass at Yale Center for British Art, who lead the data working group. And they started by getting all the different groups to identify the kinds of data they were going to be providing, and they put it into a big matrix so we could look at where the gaps were, and that incentivized institutions to then begin thinking about providing more. And then over the course of this summer, we then took that and transformed it looking at the entities that were going to make up pages in the application itself. And so as we develop, we're thinking about the objects, we're thinking about the artists and other types of people and exhibitions, and looking at the data that was coming up in that and transforming it from there. And so behind that then is a whole bunch of work that's going on that looks like it's got a lot of steps and it's very daunting, but in fact has been very, very helpful to be able to get data from the institutions, to do modeling work, and Rob Sanderson's here, Dave Newberry is not at the moment, but again, shout out to them and to the other advisors who've been really helping with that whole process. The Getty has been jumping in and helping as a collaborator as well with vocabularies and different kinds of entities that we're looking at. And for that project, the goal is to produce RDF, but we also want to be able to make it more accessible for developers. So coming out of that linked data repository will be a query library, and all of these things will be published and available. So it's more about reusing what the collaboration is doing than necessarily having to start from scratch in your own institutions every time. So over the course of the next 7 months or so into the summer of next year, all of these things will come out, as will an application, which we'll give you a glimpse at in a minute, that begins to browse across 13 museums and 1 archive. And the key point I want to raise on top of that then is not able to be shown with this projector. It's that this isn't sort of everybody having to deal with all of this. We've got different groups who are responsible in different parts of this, and it really shares the load. And that's one of the key things around this, is to figure out how to share the load between them. We then have to figure out how to work with that data to make sure that it's actually good and accurate. And I'll show you very briefly not that. I'll show you very briefly this. It's a tool that David Newberry's wrote for us. Oh, there. All right. Which way is it? That way. I thought I'd mirrored the monitors, but apparently not. Okay. So this is a little tool that he wrote where as the information is available, it allows us to establish, I'll spin down to the bottom here, it allows us to establish a model and use that model as a query. And that query then can look at information, in this case, for example, from Yale, and see that there are two primary titles, and so there may be a mapping issue where one of those should actually be an alternate title. There are classifications, which are actually pulling in live at the moment. It's the joy of a live demo. And these then are able to, there we go, show you also where there are things like AAT mappings and linkings that are being used elsewhere. And so what we're trying to do here is make it really, really simple for the institutions to say what's going on and what's working in the work that we're doing. Another project which we're somewhat involved in, but the heavy lifting is really being done by some other institutions. The Carnegie Museum of Art, again, Yale Center for British Art. We worked with the Freer Sackler on some of the early stages of it. The Getty Provenance folks, Ruth, who's here, if you want to talk more about that. But what it is beginning to establish models for provenance data and thinking of provenance as data rather than blocks of text. And the collaboration has really been very, very rich in looking at a lot of different examples and moving that forward. So one of the words that you've heard me use a little bit here is reconciliation. Reconciliation is a very simple concept. It's how do we know we're talking about the same thing? And Rob Sanderson did a great little presentation back in April where he said, you know, if I have an artist in my list that's my own unique and special snowflake, but when we start collaborating, if they're all separated and independent, then we end up with a big, huge snowball of technical debt. And so what we want to try and do in reconciliation is think about where things are the same across institutions and find automated ways of making those connections between what's the same. And so that's really another one of those processes as you think about how you want to do the data-related work. You want to be able to capture relationships. You want to be able to identify different people. You want to look at multiple uses and integrating really with standards and vocabularies.
All right, so thinking about design considerations as we are doing these multi-partner collaborations. I want to show you a few examples of what we came up with in the American Arts Collaborative, which are building on the great work with the data that Dwayne was just talking about and the great, the great consensus that we built coming out of those partner meetings. So we've arrived at some designs which we think speak to a lot of the requirements that we got back from the users that the partners surveyed, and what we ourselves know and users we talk to. We got back a lot of requests for functionality that people are already pretty familiar with, and so one of the big insights of this project, and something that we've experienced over the years as designers, is it can be very hard to get people to think outside of the box when you're asking them what they want. I think there's a famous Steve Jobs quote about that, but we don't need to talk about it. So anyway, we came up with a standard design for an object page in the AAC project that gave people what they wanted, which was a lot of great, rich data about the object, but it also took it a couple of steps further. So it's looking at related works, So here we have the work itself, the tombstone data, and on the side, you start to see this column of related works, which I think if you were looking at a typical collection site, you might expect to encounter within that museum's collection. But the power of this is that it draws in works from all the 14 partners, including, by the way, the Archives of American Art. So there's a quick navigational hop down to other works of a similar subject in other institutions. So not only can you get works by this artist, but you can get this subject of this painting is dreams. You can get other paintings that deal with dreams. And one of the other feature requests we heard a lot about was the ability to compare works. And when that actually gets fleshed out as a design concept, it can be really exciting because you can have the work side by side visually, you can have the data that you'd come to expect, but the way the page is laid out is this 2-column framework where what's unique about the works is on the outside columns, and then what's shared is in between. So you can see at a glance, wow, these works have similar themes. You can see them juxtaposed against each other on a timeline. You can see them geographically related. And I should mention, too, that the page is laid out as a series of components that are sort of layered on top of each other. So if the data is not available to fill one of these components, then we simply don't display it. So the design is extensible and flexible in that way. And then finally, we're able to compare artists as well with the same sort of layered, componentized layout. But we can see between these two individuals the relationships between the subjects they painted, their media they used. We can see relationships that they had in common between people, other artists, patrons, contemporaries, correspondents. We can see them laid out together on the timeline. And because of the amazing richness of the data from the archives, we're going to be able to flesh these relationships out with archival material as well. So really exciting, and we heard back from the partners that, designs like this really help to sort of concretize what's going on behind the scenes with all the mechanics of the data and the reconciliation and such.
One of the interesting things about that, of course, as Leslie said, is the fact that partners and others can also contribute individual little visualizations or interactions of their own, and they can slide into the design. So a couple of the things fairly quickly. One is beginning to sort of look at working with different kinds of technologies like text analytics and sentiment analysis. This was building on something that a grad student did out of the Maryland Institute College of the Arts, Micah, looking at Van Gogh's letters, and what we wanted to do was begin to try and plot that against the works themselves to begin to get a sense of what the dialogue was from the artist behind the works themselves, but to do that in a light exploratory way. We've been talking to various folks in the education space and thinking about where we might be able to build visualizations that support pulling data from different sources on different topical areas and putting that under teacher control for supporting curricula. Another one we're doing, we've got a small client down in Texas, the Texas Coastal Bend in South Texas that deals with ranching culture there. And because they're a small private collection, what they want to do is take this material that's not very well known and interrelate it with other institutions. And so we've been planning around how we handle the vocabularies in ways of making it very tightly interconnected. So rather than just simply saying, let's tag these items with subjects, we're really focusing on structures for both what things are about and what's depicted at various levels, and then also layering in a topic interaction that drives the navigation in the site and helps with exploratory behavior in a subject area that many people don't actually know very well. And in order to do that, there's a hierarchy of subject terms. Neil Johnson was very involved in the development of that hierarchy, and that hierarchy, then we decided not to put the navigational structure into the same hierarchy, so it actually sits separately. That allows the subjects to be able to be aligned with outside vocabularies. And then what we do is we map between these two hierarchies in order to be able to do that. The benefit of doing that is the fact that then external collaborators can come along who have their own keywords and hierarchies and can map back through to the themes, and that creates these connections with other institutions that also have material you want to see. So within that collaboration, we're really looking for things like serendipity and synthesis and making things very visual. We want to be looking for that heterogeneous content interaction and enable people to actually do things with the information. So do you want to? We got 2 or 3 minutes. We can get through this last little bit.
Mad dash. Sustainability. So we know that these projects are immersive, they're super focused, they're grant funded. So what do you do? How do you keep going after the time period of the project runs out? What happens afterward? We think about this with our partners, and we know that things change when more data, new data is introduced. It affects the user experience of the product you're developing. Obviously, it adds value, it enhances the experience, and not only that, but additional data that partners produce once they've learned the techniques and methodologies of the collaborative project, that data can enrich their own websites as well. And enrich the relationships. It's also very critical when you're making a commitment to the community that your content and data will be available. So persistent URLs have to be part of the project, they have to be factored in, and they have to be maintained and kept up. And that's really one of the key points, is that maintaining these destinations over time is going to be really important to selling, enhancing that value, and building credibility.
So one of the other pieces that's often a barrier in collaborations is the barrier of the technology itself. And so one of the things that we've been really trying to focus on in our work is how to separate data management from data delivery, primarily to make sure that the modification and changes to legacy systems comes off the critical path of collaborative projects, because it just ends up really becoming complicated. So an example of an architecture that aligns with that, if we think sort of typically you have your storage areas, your application, your APIs, we've been focused very much around the ecosystem idea, and the ecosystem as a very rich common environment. We're seeing this a lot now. You see this with work that's going on in the Getty, work that's going on in Cleveland, the Smithsonian, others, doing more and more of this. And what we're trying to lay out here is that linked data in a common store in the center that means that you can integrate across different kinds of information sources, and then you begin to build relationships across those sources, manage the delivery of that, and it keeps it really flexible. So, as Leslie said a couple times, and I think it's really important, communication is actually a really, really important thing. And that happens at the collaborative projects level by actually publishing some of what we're doing, providing information out on the web. Within the context of the American Art Collaborative Project, there's going to be lessons learned and good practices that are documented and spread, and these tools will be available in things like the Museum Provenance. There's a site up that's already providing a wealth of information. And, you know, I've just stuck this here because we had the space, but I love that this was a client sketching as we were in a working session that she felt that the linked data was the Elmer's glue of the project, and we captured this great quote: "Don't build it as data, build it as models for reusability." And so I'm just going to flip through here to the finish, then separating data management from delivery, listening to that user feedback and iterating that regularly, and all of these other things as summaries of the kinds of things that you can do to be successful with your collaboration projects. Thank you. questions? Are we done? Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience for Leslie and Dwayne? Nothing. Well, I believe the closing plenary is in here in just a few moments, so you're in good positions. Hold those seats.
And we will be around this afternoon and this evening, so if you want to just come sit in the bar and have a chat, that's good too.